Thank you all for joining us tonight. And now I'd like to introduce Megan Roberts. She will continue on with the presentation. And Megan, before you get going, if you wouldn't mind taking a minute or more here to introduce yourself and tell us more.
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be speaking with you guys tonight. I am an assistant professor at Northwestern University and also a speech-language pathologist who has fallen madly in love with tiny people and their families with hearing loss. My original background was just in early intervention, birth to 3, and then like all of my research questions, I had a little girl on my caseload who had a hearing loss, and I just felt like I needed to learn more about how to help her language and help her mom. And so that's when I started to doing research related to what are the best strategies, language facilitation strategies that we can be using with these young kids in the home throughout the day so that we can maximize dosage. So I've been studying these strategies, oh my goodness, for 8 years now, long time, and I'm just really happy that I can share some information with you guys. Let me make sure I have control. Oh, look, I have control. Yay. These things always make me nervous, you know, doing technology for the first time. So first I want to talk a little bit about why I love working with parents and caregivers and why it's what we know about parents' involvement in early language. We know that children learn language in the context of parent-child interactions in this really beautiful dyad in which social engagement drives language. So a kid may hear a new word from a parent, and then they get that information, and they start to learn new words. We know specifically with kids with hearing loss, there's several factors that are predictive of language development in kids with hearing loss, the first of which is maternal sensitivity. So we know, for example, that sensitivity to a child communication at 9 months predicts vocabulary as late as 5 years of age. So if every time a 9-month-old goes ba or ga, a parent says baby or go, responding contingently to what the child says, that is related to the child's long-term language development. We know that kind of sentence complexity and rate of communication from parents relates to long-term language development, as does what we call these language facilitation techniques, such as expansions and recasts, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and also visual and tactile strategies. So getting a child's visual attention before either signing or saying a word, tactile strategies such as tickling and using touch to teach parts of words. All of these things we know are correlated or related to long-term child communication outcomes. So I'm going to be specifically talking about 2, 4, 6, 7 strategies today that have been used close to 25 years in children, you know, between 12 and 48 months of age. And more recently, the most recent grant that I'm studying right now is testing these strategies with kids, especially with hearing loss. So the first strategy I'm going to talk about is called play and engage. And what this involves is really, we want to set up an interactive context between the adult and child, because we believe that communication happens on this platform of shared engagement and attention. So what this looks like depends on the age of the kid. So I have a tiny person who's 18 months of age, and right now her favorite thing for me to do is eat her little tummy when we do diaper changes. And so I'm meeting where she's at. I'm tickling her belly. I'm engaging with her. She loves to put things in and out, so we're often, even though it's so boring for me, we're taking things in and out and in and out and in and out. And I'm trying to meet her where she's at, follow her lead. Why we do this is kids are more likely to be engaged and learn language when they're doing things they enjoy. So a kid is focused on tickling or focused on a ball. And often as adults, we kind of get bored with these tasks because they're not that interesting. Kids, particularly young kids, like to do things over and over and over and over and over again. And so when we redirect them, it refocuses their attention. They have to cognitively switch from what they're doing to something new. And it makes it harder for them to orient to the new referent and then learn that new word. And so by playing what they're interested in, playing with what they're interested in, and meeting where they're them where they're at, we optimize their opportunity for communication to occur. So if a kid is playing with the ball, we label ball, it's a lot easier for the child to learn that word as opposed to redirecting them. If the kid's playing with the ball, a dog barks, and the adult says, oh, look, there's a dog. That's a lot harder for the child to stop the focus. Okay, I was playing with the ball. Now I've got to look up. Now I got to find the ball, not find the dog. Wait, what is a dog? And so it makes it a lot harder for a kid to learn that new word. So I'm very practical, and so I like to break things down really specifically. So what this means concretely is that you are at your child's level. So if your kiddo is on the floor, you're on the floor. If they're swinging on a swing, you bring your face down so that they're eye to eye. If they're at the table, you're sitting right next to them across from them. You're doing what they're doing. If the child puts the blocks in the bucket, you put the blocks in the bucket. This is kind of the next strategy is a kind of a crazy one in that we want to avoid directions and let children lead play. Now, that's not to say we never give directions, but in the context of play, we really want this to be child-focused. So what I urge parents to do is only give directions that they are going to follow through with. So, for example, if the kid is playing with a barn and you say, put the horsey in the barn. Well, why do we want the kid to put the horsey in the barn? If we're focusing on following one-step directions, maybe so. But within the context of play, what we want the child to say on his own is like, Mommy, I'm putting the horsey in the barn, or horse, or sign horse in the barn. We want children to communicate spontaneously during play interactions. And the best way to teach them to do that is to model that rather than give them directions or ask questions. Now, we ask questions and give directions all the time. Put your shoes on, put your coat on, what do you want to eat? Things when it really matters. But in play, what we're really going for is wanting to teach the child that we love doing what they're doing, we want to hear what they're interested in, and building upon that communication to teach them, okay, when I'm talking and excited about what I'm doing, I want to share that with my mom or my dad or my caregiver. So we're going to choose toys that are interesting and engaging, and then we're also going to put away toys that aren't being used. So why we do this is if you're playing with a puzzle and then the kid's like, no, I'm done with the puzzle, and then moves on to playing with cars, if the puzzle's still out in your modeling language, it's hard for the child to know, okay, what is the car? Is this puzzle piece the car? Is this the car? Is the ramp the car? And so we're going to kind of remove toys that aren't, the kid isn't playing with, so that it's more salient what the language model is. And then the last strategy is we're going to substitute undesired activities for desired activities. And by that I mean, my favorite example, I worked with this awesome mom, her kid, we were playing with this sensory bin of beans that she had made. And at one point the kid, he picks up the beans and he literally starts throwing them in her face. And I was like, oh goodness. And I was like, just ignore it and then redirect. And so she ignored it and she's like, we put the beans in the bowl. And all of a sudden he was like, okay, I know how to do that. So rather than don't throw beans, which is telling your kid what not to do, saying we put the beans in the bucket. In that instance, gave him a great example of what he should be doing, and he did it right away. So these are all strategies that we're going to use to engage children so that we can set this foundation up for language. So the next strategy is called notice and respond. So we're playing and engaging. Kids are noticing that we are loving what they're doing, and now they're starting to communicate. And my belief is that all children are communicating now. They may not be saying words, they may not be signing words yet, but they are sharing information at some level, and that may be kind of this pre-linguistic, pointing, showing, giving, making vocalizations, reaching. Or it may be linguistic in nature. It may be signs, it may be words, it may be symbols or pictures. And so these are kind of the how they communicate, and then there's the reason for why. So oftentimes kids learn to request things first because there's that really nice reinforcer. I say potato chips, and I get potato chips. Whereas commenting is a kind of a harder skill to teach, in that that's just sharing information. So we are going to first decide, okay, how's my kiddo telling me what he wants, and why is he communicating primarily? And once we figure this out, then we're going to notice and respond to all communication, because it reinforces to the child, oh my gosh, when I try to tell my mom or dad something, they always respond to me. So it teaches the child the more I communicate, the more information and feedback and reinforcement I get. The more the child communicates, then the easier it is for them to communicate more, the more practice they receive, and the easier communication becomes. So it's this very cyclical interaction by which the child vocalizes, then the parent may respond. The kid's like, oh my gosh, my mommy responded, now I take a turn, and so that's that back and forth. And by noticing and responding, we teach the child that every time I communicate, my mommy or daddy notices. And so every single time, whether it's a point, a gesture, a vocalization, we want adults to respond. And we want, ideally, for adults to respond by talking about what the child is doing. So if the child is eating yogurt, my kid right now says mogurt, she's eating mogurt, that's all she wants is mogurt. You know, I'm talking about I stir the yogurt, I scoop the yogurt, that yogurt's yummy. We know this, that language is most meaningful when it's related to what your child is doing or in response to what your child is trying to communicate. So if I were queen of the world and I could teach every parent in this universe one strategy, it would be this strategy, which would be that every time your child communicates, respond as if you were your child. So oftentimes what happens is a kid, say, has a juice box that they want opened, and they go something like, meh. Oftentimes a parent will respond by saying, do you want the juice open? Which is great in the sense that it will teach the child to say yes, no questions. But I'll bet you if every day you had a juice box and every day your child loved that juice box, and rather than say, you want the juice, if you rather you just said open or open the juice, I would bet within 3 or 4 days of consistent modeling that the child will learn either to be able to say the word or to sign that, because it's highly reinforcing. The kid wants the juice, the kid has had 4 examples of what he or she should be saying, and once he says it, he then gets the juice. So our goal here, we're databased, very databased, is we want, in an ideal world, parents to be 90%. So we want 90% of your child's communication, we want you to respond to 90% of your child's communication. And so what this measure is the percent of communicative acts that are followed by an adult response within 2 seconds. So when I work with parents, I'm constantly, I'll model for a little bit, and then they will play with their child, and I'll coach them on this. I'll coach parents on this, and I'll say, you know, if the kid goes, nah, and the parent, you know, doesn't respond right away, I'll say respond. I will literally coach parents so that by the end they are at 90% responsive. So every single time that your child is communicating something, you're giving them feedback of what they should be saying here. And I wish I could show video. I have so many moments of kids with a little light bulb going on. It's like, oh my gosh, this is what I should be saying in this moment. And it's really fun to see the power of words, and kids learn the power of words. And it's even more fun to see parents teach kids this phenomenon. It's my absolute favorite thing in this planet. So in addition to responding, so you're at your kid's level, you're responding to everything the child says, the next thing is you're going to take turns. So rather than say many things, you're going to really say one thing. And this, I kind of equate this to communication catch. So the child communicates one thing, you're going to respond with one thing. Child communicates, adult communicates. Child communicates, adult communicates. You're really only going to say something after your child communicates. And this is really hard because silence feels kind of yucky at times. But what this teaches kids is that I have to have a conversation. My mommy says something, or my daddy says something, and then I say something, and then they say something, and then they wait because it's then my turn to say something. By having this wait time, which sometimes feels super awkward but really is only something like 4 or 5 seconds, is it allows kids more opportunity to process information, but also it teaches them how to have a conversation. So it gives them airtime, it gives them space to be able to practice their language, but it also tells them when you wait that, oh my gosh, it is my turn in this conversation and I need to participate. So our goal with matched turns is 75%. So 75% of what adults say should be matched or in response to child communication. And why that's important is many times we have parents that are really responsive. They don't miss any communication, but for every one thing the child says, they may say 4 or 5 things. And so if the kid goes, ball, the parent may say, you love that ball. We got that ball for your birthday. What else do you want for your birthday? And then it's, 4 utterances, and the child has not had their turn in the conversation. So we want to make sure we have enough wait time. So the fourth strategy is what we call mirroring and mapping. And by mirroring and mapping, I mean the adult mirrors or imitates the child's nonverbal behaviors. So that would be, for example, the child may be stirring some yogurt, and then the adult maps language onto these actions. So then they say stir. So the sequence is the child does an action, the adult imitates the action, and then maps words onto it. What I love about this strategy is this strategy works really well for what we call low-rate communicators. So if you have a kiddo who isn't necessarily vocalizing, signing, talking, pointing, gesturing a lot, this lets you join the interaction without filling the airspace. So you imitate what your child's doing, and then you map language onto that activity. And it allows you to have this balanced turn in the absence of true child communication. What's really interesting here is that when you imitate the action and then you map language onto it, it becomes more meaningful for the child, because what the child recognizes is, oh my great goodness, I am driving the car, and my mommy is driving the car, and she says car or drive. That must be what I say when I'm driving the car, versus what we call kind of the parallel talk or the self-talk, where you're just describing what you're doing or describing what the child's doing. What's different and kind of subtle but very important is the child does it and the parent does it, and then the parent describes the action. I'll never forget this interaction I got to watch, where this kiddo was, I learned that his mom was fun for the first time, and the mom was putting Play-Doh, the child was putting Play-Doh on the window, and putting Play-Doh on the window, and then we said, you know, what do you think about this? Is it okay if what do you think about you putting Play-Doh on the window? So all of a sudden the mom starts pushing Play-Doh on the window, and out of the corner of the eye, the kid looks at her and smiles and, you know, hands her some Play-Doh. And I'll never forget that moment where the kid was like, oh my good gracious, like my mom is doing what I'm doing. She thinks I'm super fun. We are sticking Play-Doh on the window together. And it completely changed the interaction. The kid could learn on, Play-Doh, sticky, all these things, because we're meeting the kid where they're at, we're imitating the actions, and then providing some really rich language models on top of those actions. So we do mirroring and mapping when the child is not communicating. So if the kid is talking, or gesturing, vocalizing, we're just going to respond every time. When they're not doing that, we're going to imitate the action and then label the action in words. So the example here is if the kid is feeding the baby, the adult may also feed the baby and say, we feed the baby. Sometimes you might not have two sets of material, so you could act on one object together. One of my favorite routines is, you know, things in the kitchen where it's like pouring the milk into the cereal bowl, for example. So you may start pouring the milk, the kid may grab onto the milk, and then you might say together, we pour, or I pour the milk. So in that situation, you're really teaching the child, this is what I say when I get breakfast out. So like anything, all of these strategies are what I call kind of tools in a toolbox. And so with mirroring and mapping, you're going to want this to be as close to your child's actions as possible, because it makes the language more obvious. We're going to obviously avoid mirroring behaviors that aren't acceptable, throwing toys, picking your nose, hitting. So anything we don't want the child to do, we're just going to ignore. And what we want to do, lastly, is balance mirroring and mapping with playing. So we don't want to overmap. So if every time the kid dumps the beans, we don't want to say dump, 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 dump. We want to say dump. Wait 5 seconds, we dump the beans. Wait another 5 seconds, you know, beans in the jar, to give a nice balance of pausing, but also some really rich linguistic models. So the fifth strategy I'm going to talk about is what we call target talk. So strategies 1 through 4 are what we kind of call basic responsive interaction strategies. So the first 4 strategies is meeting the kid where they're at and responding with anything the kid is interested in. These next set of strategies is really fine-tuning what you say. Specifically, this strategy is what we call target talk. And the purpose of target talk, our goals with target talk, is what we want for kids is we want to increase the rate at which children communicate, the diversity, and independence. So whether your child is is talking or signing, we want them to increase their diversity of vocabulary and their independence. So what we don't want is kids that only sign or talk in response to questions. We want children to naturally or spontaneously share what they're interested in, what they know, and also what they want. And so we want to model specific language targets because when you model a specific target that is contingent or related to a child's communication, it is the most powerful form. Now, there's kind of this balance between receptive language, what you understand, and expressive language, what you say. And, you know, many people recommend, you know, talking to your child, which obviously is great to talk to your children. What I would argue is that if we sometimes simplify our language to match your child's level, it may be easier to learn language more quickly because it's easier to understand. So rather than, if, for example, if your child isn't yet talking, rather than always speaking incomplete sentences, maybe starting to have 50% of what you say to be in single words, even single syllable words, it may make it easier to imitate and also easier to understand, right? So if the kid is rolling a ball, rather than say, I'm rolling the ball down the ramp, it's very hard for the child to parse out, like, what part of that he should be saying. We would say something like roll. The kid learns to map, okay, this is the action, me pushing the ball down the ramp, and then I say the word roll. So single words are often easier to imitate and easier to understand. So how do we choose where to start with kids? So oftentimes we look at where is the child's current communication. So it may be that the child is just vocalizing not using gestures, vocalizing with gestures, vocalizing or gestures, vocalizations, and some single words. And by single words, those can be spoken words or signs. This works in either case, either mode. Kids that have 50-plus words, and then kids that are really starting to use 2 words. And what we want to do is we want to go one step above. And so typically, you can kind of see in this chart, you know, that the kids that don't yet have gestures, we're going to target single words and often gestures. Kids that have, you know, at least 50 words, we're going to be targeting 2-word utterances. And for kids with less than 50 words or very few verbs, we're going to be really targeting single words. And so our goal with targets is that we would like 50% of what adults say to be one of the child's targets. So, you know, if it's your child is at the single word level, we want 50% of what you say to be nouns, verbs, protoverbs, adjectives like protoverbs, you know, in, on, under, because 50% we want the child to be able to imitate and be able to imitate easily. And then the other should be higher, should be 1 to 2 words above his or her level. And we really want to, most of what you say to be teaching words. So nouns, verbs, modifiers, rather than saying like, there it is, which is kind of ambiguous, you know, saying the ball is under the couch. And so using phrases that have great teaching words rather than either ambiguous words or just like, yeah, good job, or it doesn't give children enough information. So the next strategy I'm going to talk about is what we call expanding communication. And an expansion is when you imitate what your child has communicated and then you add 1 or more words. The most powerful expansion will include one of your child's communication targets, and I'll explain what that means in a sec. So expansions are one of my favorite strategies because it immediately connects child communication to new information or new communication. So if the kid says ball and you say roll the ball, your child hears the word that they have just uttered, that they've just spoken, and then the new word that goes with the word they already know. It helps children learn a new vocabulary and talk in more complex sentences because you're half of the complex sentence the child's already said, right? So if a kid says ball and you say roll the ball, you're teaching a 2-word combination, but in the context of a word that your child has just said, increasing the likelihood that the child will imitate and also understand the new 2-word combination. So what this looks like is you imitate the communication and then you add a target word. So for example, the child may point to a ball, and then you would also point to the ball and say ball. Or the child may say or sign ball, and you would then sign or say roll the ball. You can expand all types of communication, right? And so you can expand words, vocalizations. So, for example, if a kid is saying, I'm pointing to the cup, you would also point to the cup and say cup. If the kid is just making a noise while also holding a cow, you're going to want to kind of take your best guess and maybe point to the cow and say cow. In terms of gestures, when a kid points or reaches, you would also want to imitate that. So the kid maybe points to the baby, and then you would point to the baby and say baby. That teaches the child, okay, I'm pointing to the baby, mommy's pointing to the baby, and then she said baby. Oh, that's what I must, she wants the baby, and she said baby. I also want the baby, and so therefore I'm going to say baby. Same thing with show. So the child may hold up the block, you would point to it and say block. Give, the child gives an object, you would take it and then label that. So, you know, a child may pick up a block, I hand you the block, and you would take the block and say block. In these situations, it's hard to imitate a show because the kid is showing it to you, so you want to respond contingently to that. The same thing with a give. Like if a kid gives you a car, you don't want to give it back. You want to take it and label the object. So our goal for expansions is 40% of what you say should be 40% of child communication you should expand. So if a kid says 100 things, 40 of those 100 things you should imitate and then add a word. So one of the last strategies I'm going to talk about is communication temptation. And what I love about these strategies is that these strategies help us increase rate of communication. So one way when kids aren't talking that often is we use mirror mapping. So the child does something, you imitate that action, and then you map language onto it. Another way to increase a rate of communication would be to kind of set up these nonverbal tasks. And there are 4 that I'll talk about today. The first of which is inadequate proportion. So what this means is the best example is that snack. It's in the morning, your child's eating Cheerios, you may give 1 or 2, you know, a little bit of Cheerios in the bowl and then wait for your child to say something or communicate. So if you put a little bit of Cheerios in the bowl and then you wait and you hold the box and you look at him or her, what you're hoping is they do something. They reach for the box, they say, in an ideal world, they'd say, Mommy, dearest, please hand me that delicious box of cereal. In the absence of that, we just want to build to the next level. So if the kid says, if the kid points, you're going to want to point and then say cereal. If the kid says cereal, you're going to want to say pour the cereal. If the kid says pour the cereal, you're going to want to say pour the cereal in the bowl. And so we want the rate of communication up, and then we're going to respond by expanding that communication. Another example I like to give is the bathtub. So turning the water on just a little bit and then stopping the water for a kid who loves baths. Another example might be things with like milk, pouring a little bit of milk in the cup and then waiting, a little bit of Play-Doh and then waiting, a little bit of paint and then waiting. It may be that you are playing with a bunch of musical toys and you give maybe you give half of the drum and not the whole, or the cymbal and not the whole cymbal. So that you're creating a situation in which the child wants something from you, attempts to request that information so that then you can build on that language with an expansion. The next strategy is called assistance, and in the case of assistance, we are creating situations in which the child needs help. I'll never forget this kid with a juice box, and you know, the natural tendency when a kid is struggling is that we want to jump right in. And he couldn't get the little straw off and the little wrapper off, and I was just coaching his mom. I was like, why don't we just wait and see what he does? And it drives us all crazy because we know what they want, we want to help. And sure enough, he looked right up at her and he said, help, Mama? And she was like, I didn't even know he could do that. And so by just simply waiting and giving him the opportunity, he was able to demonstrate what he knows, and then we were able to expand, you know, help me, Mama, open the juice box, so that we could add on to that and teach him a more complex way of saying something. Lots of examples of assistance, you know, getting a shoe on, getting a coat on, opening, you know, a box of toys, anything that requires help rather than helping waiting for the child to initiate and then helping once they request that help. Another one is waiting with a routine or cue, and so this is kind of setting up a routine or a set of activities in which the child is expects something to happen and then waiting. So a great example is you may be pushing in a swing. You push, 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 and then wait. And so then you want your kid to say push. In the absence of that, the kid may go on, then you can model push, teaching the child that this is what I say in that moment. Another example of waiting a routine may be something as simple as, dumping water in the bathtub, right? So you may scoop up something and dump, and scoop and dump, and scoop and dump, and scoop and wait. Another what we call communication temptation is choices, and so this is holding up two objects and waiting for your child to communicate. So say it's mealtime, for example, you may hold up, a box of cereal and, a thing of bagels and waiting for your child to point or to sign or to say a word, and then once they have, then kind of expanding that. So in the case of the bagel and the cereal, the kid may say cereal, and then you may say, oh, eat cereal, or eat cereal. Same thing, if the kid may point to the cereal, you would just then model cereal. So you're setting up the environment to elicit a request, and once the child is requesting, then you're mapping language onto that to teach the child what to say in that specific moment. So we use these communication temptations to give children more opportunities to practice. The best part and the thing I love the most about working with parents is that unlike speech therapy, when sometimes I only see a kid once or twice a week, parents you guys interact with your kids multiple times a day. And so by engaging with your child or setting up these little moments, several times a day, it gives children continuous practice with these new communication skills, potentially increasing their rate of communication and then subsequently their complexity. These communication temptations give more opportunities to reinforce and teach new language. So, every time you give a choice and the child communicates, you're then able to respond and then reinforce that communication by expanding and then giving the object or action. And so what you're going to do is you're going to set up the opportunity. So in the case of choices, you may have the cereal and the bagel. You're going to wait until the child communicates, gestures, vocalizes, says, or signs a word, and then you're going to expand with a communication target. I have this great little story of this dude in a peanut butter jar, and his mom was awesome but just overwhelmed, 4 kids, and I said, okay, well, let's just pick one time a day and one time that you can wait for him to ask help before you give him what he needs, because the rest of the time of the day it's just get her done. It's just get out of the house. And she said, okay, I can pick one thing. And we decided it was the peanut butter jar. He loved peanut butter, and he'd open up the peanut butter jar, get a spoon, and he would just eat the peanut butter out of the jar. And I said, okay, well, what happens if rather than when you see him go to the pantry, what if you just wait? And she said, okay, I can do this. And after 4 days, every time he went so for 4 consecutive days, he would go in, and she would just sit there and wait. And all she did was, after he handed it and vocalized, she just said, open. And on the 4th day, he was like, I got this. And he handed her the peanut butter jar and said, open. And from then on, every time he wanted peanut butter, he went into the pantry, got the peanut butter, brought it to his mom, and said, open. And it only took 4 days. But that's all she could handle, because life is crazy sometimes as a parent. And we just picked the one time a day and the one strategy that we were going to try it on, and he learned it in 4 days, and it was great. I will never forget the jar of peanut butter. So oh, yes, look at me. I'm so good at time. I even have 15 minutes of questions. So what's hard about these webinars for me is that I love interaction, and I love brainstorming things like what routines do you do, and how could we kind of problem solve or come up with activities or temptations or activities that might help to do these strategies in your daily routines. So that's what I'm hoping to spend the next 15 minutes is just brainstorming ways that you might be able to do this in everyday life. Any questions or comments?
Hi, Meg. This is Kristen.
Hi, Kristen.
I wondered if, I love all these strategies, and I think this, you know, I've heard a lot of the strategies, but some of these things are new to me, and I think it would be great for parents that I work with that aren't on the call tonight to have access to, and while we can give them the webinar, I just wondered if there was another resource too. You know, do you have like a website that you run, or do you have some other way that they could also access this information?
So I have a bunch of handouts that are more parent-friendly,
Okay.
that are in PDF form that I am happy to send you.
Okay.
That would be easier to distribute. I am in the process of going and filming some of these things, so with my own daughter, because I have consent for her to show them on the internet. So my goal would be to then demonstrate what these look like in different parts of the day. Every time I think to get my iPhone out, I have some sort of schmack or my hair is a mess and I'm wearing something probably inappropriate. So the videos are slower than I want. But my goal would be to have little video clips on my website. But for right now, the PDFs of the handout I can provide you guys.
That would be great. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, Megan, thank you so much for taking time out on a Monday night to give us this amazing presentation. We truly appreciate it. I look forward to having it available online for our future families. And again, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
No, you guys are great. Thank you for the invitation, and anything I can do, I'm happy to help in any way. I love this topic. I love working with families, and whatever I can do to help, I'm happy to.
Thank you so much.